Here's a guy who thinks atheism is scientifically impossible.
Atheism is the belief that there is no God.
Sometimes the word atheism is used that way, but as the definition that you put on screen says, it can also simply be the lack of a belief in God. You don't have to assert the non-existence of God to be an atheist. Even agnostics can be atheists.
Atheists consider atheism to be the most logical and scientifically based worldview. Conversely, they also believe Christianity to be one of the most illogical worldviews based solely on blind faith.
No, I don't think it's based solely on blind faith. It's also clearly based on testimony. I just can't become convinced of the claims of Christianity based merely on testimony. If Jesus wants me to believe that he rose from the dead, he's going to have to show me at least as much as he showed the Apostle Thomas.
In this video, we will see why atheism is scientifically impossible. We'll consider some scientific evidence for the existence of God. We'll see whether it's Christianity or atheism that truly requires blind faith. And finally, we'll get to the heart of why atheists really refuse to believe in God.
I don't refuse to believe in God. That makes it sound like I'm choosing to not be convinced. I just naturally don't find any evidence or arguments for God to be convincing. Most of the time, I don't even recognize the arguments as coherent.
Atheists tend to be very confident that their worldview is the most scientifically provable.
No, I don't think it's scientifically provable. I think it's logically provable.
However, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that this simply isn't true. First, consider the fact that one of an atheist's most foundational beliefs is based on a scientific impossibility. That is, that the entire universe as we know it came from nothing on its own.
I no more believe that the universe came from nothing than theists believe that God came from nothing. Just as theists don't believe that God was created, I don't believe that the universe was created. In fact, I don't even think it's coherent to say that the universe was created.
Atheists pride themselves on believing solely in things that can be observably provable. Yet, physics has never once confirmed an instance of something spontaneously arising from nothing. If someone were to leave an empty garage unattended for an indefinite period of time, no matter how much time passed, a car would never form on its own.
Well, in principle, quantum weirdness could produce a car, but I don't believe that the universe was created by any kind of quantum phenomena. I don't believe that the universe was created at all. I don't believe that it appeared out of nothing because I don't believe that there has ever been nothing.
This sounds so obvious that it's laughable, yet atheists believe that the entire universe spontaneously formed on its own.
I do not, in fact, believe that. I don't think it formed at all, spontaneously or otherwise. Rather, there was never a time when it didn't already exist.
Along these same lines, one has to consider the theory of biogenesis. According to biogenesis, life can only come from pre-existing life. Life cannot come from non-living material.
If you look at the definition you displayed, it does not say that biogenesis is a theory. It says that it is a hypothesis. A hypothesis is, at best, just an educated guess. A theory is a hypothesis that has been corroborated by experimentation. Biogenesis is not a scientific theory.
But not only do atheists believe that something came from nothing when the universe was born, but that at some point in time, life would have had to have come from non-life.
Yes, life is self-replicating nucleotide chains. The moment a nucleotide chain became capable of self-replicating, it then became a life form.
While it may contradict atheism, the theory of biogenesis actually agrees with Christianity.
Given that it's not a scientific theory, the fact that Christianity agrees with biogenesis is not a reason to believe that Christianity is consistent with science.
The Bible teaches us that all life did in fact come from pre-existing life. And not just any pre-existing life, but the source and creator of all life, God Himself.
Does that mean that God Himself is a life form? How do you define life if life includes non-corporeal beings?
And this isn't the only scientific evidence for Christianity. Consider the car mentioned earlier. Obviously, it would never spontaneously form itself over time, but the fact that it exists is observable evidence of at least one thing, that the car has a creator. You don't need to have met the creator of the car to know that he exists. You know that he exists because the car exists.
We know that because we know that cars have not always existed. The universe has always existed. Also, it sounds like you are arguing that the mere fact that something exists is proof that it had a creator. You obviously don't believe in this principle, though, because you believe that God exists, and you don't believe that the mere fact that God exists is proof that God had a creator. If God can exist without needing a creator, why can't the universe?
In fact, to say that the car's creator doesn't exist simply because you have never seen him would be completely foolish.
And completely disanalogous to my arguments about God. The reason I don't believe that the universe had a creator is not because I haven't seen the creator. It's because it is self-contradictory to say that the space-time continuum had a creator. You can't create something at a time when it already exists, and there was never a time when the space-time continuum didn't already exist.
Romans 1:19 and 20 says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, has been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse."
If they've been clearly perceived, what does it mean to say that they're invisible? And again, why does the fact that the universe exists prove that it had a creator? If God can exist without a creator, why can't the universe?
So what observable evidence do we have for the existence of God? The existence of creation. The fact that creation exists is observable proof of the Creator.
How do we know that the things we see existing are creations, though?
Having said all this, as much as a Christian and an atheist could debate science, and as useful and beneficial as science can be, science itself isn't enough to provide full definitive proof of the origins of the universe.
Of course not, because the universe has always existed, and thus had no origins. Even if time has only existed since the Big Bang, there was still never a time when the universe did not exist. Since there was never a time when the universe did not exist, it never needed an origin. It couldn't have come from anywhere or anything, because it's always already been here.
This is simply because none of us were there to observe and test whether or not there was a Big Bang or a big God who created everything.
The reason we believe that there was a Big Bang is because we see everything moving away from everything else. So we infer from this that things were much closer to each other in the past. This is corroborated by the fact that we see radiation that was produced from the heat and density of the past universe. However, it's a straw man to say that the Big Bang created anything. It didn't. It was simply the earliest state of everything.
So ultimately, both beliefs have to rely on faith. However, Christianity is not a blind faith.
No, my belief that there is no God is not based on faith. It's based on a deduction. The universe has always existed, therefore there was never a time when it didn't already exist, therefore it could not have been created, therefore it could not coherently have a creator. The first premise is axiomatically true, and each inference from that first premise inescapably follows by logical necessity.
The Bible itself, especially the Gospels and Epistles, is written eyewitness testimony to actual historical events.
No, the Gospels are not eyewitness testimony. We don't even know who wrote the Gospels. The names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were ascribed to them decades after they were written. The Gospel of John was written the latest and is the least plausibly an eyewitness account.
And not only that, but we also have our conscience. Romans 2:15 says that the law is written on our hearts, and that our conscience also bears witness.
Then why is it that my conscience tells me that the things God is portrayed as doing in the Old Testament are so repugnant? If God's law is written into my conscience, why does my conscience tell me that God is immoral?
Is it really a coincidence that our conscience happens to be based on the law of God, the Ten Commandments?
No, because it's not. My conscience doesn't tell me anything about keeping the Sabbath, prioritizing Yahweh over other gods, or making graven images. And wouldn't it be a simpler explanation that the Ten Commandments were written to be based on the conscience of their author rather than the other way around?
We instinctively know that it's wrong to lie, steal, murder, and the rest.
Nope, not all of the rest.
Atheism cannot account for that.
I already gave an account. The Ten Commandments were written by a human author who based them on his own conscience rather than the other way around.
Ultimately, though, a lack of evidence is not at the heart of why an atheist or anyone rejects the existence of God. Right before Romans 1 tells us that what can be known about God is plain to us by observing creation.
Given that the universe can't coherently be created, I don't see how it could possibly be a creation.
Verse 18 says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." This is ultimately why the atheist rejects the existence of God. Because we love our sin, we don't want a holy and just God to exist.
What would be the point of denying the existence of something that I just don't want to exist? Where would that get me? I don't want climate change to exist. I don't therefore deny that it does. What would be the point?
We would rather just enjoy our sin and convince ourselves that there is no God to hold us accountable, so we suppress the truth.
Again, what would that accomplish? If I really believed that God exists, what would I stand to gain from simply denying it? How would that get me off the hook for anything? How would that make sin any more enjoyable?
But it is completely foolish to reject the existence of God. The fool says in his heart, "There is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good."
Really? No atheist has done any good ever?
Rejecting the existence of God is not going to end well for anyone.
Then I must really believe God doesn't exist. Otherwise, what would be the point of denying his existence? If he exists, I know I'm not going to get off the hook by denying that he exists, so that's clearly not why I'm an atheist. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.